Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Good Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As you can see, it's surrounded by glasses this afternoon. I did think about splitting this particular tasting into two, but I just couldn't well, it would have ended up being 4 and 2, which I didn't really want to do. So I thought, yeah, let's do all 6, shall we? So we're looking at Benromach again. I think I've looked at them once before. It's difficult to remember everything that I've reviewed, given that we've done over 100 episodes of the show now. So the reason we're looking at Benromach is obviously because they've released 2 new versions of both the organic and the peat smoke. So I thought it was a good time to sort of, have a look back at the entire range. They've also released this new packaging as well, which is really quite funky. And if you look at the box, nice and shiny, which always stands out quite nicely. But also, this is the new 100 proof bottling, which they have released of their 10-year-old, which kind of replaced the 10-year-old cask strength they did a number of years ago. So you'll have to bear with me on this, as we've got 6 to get through, and I'll dispense with the usual waffle and just introduce this afternoon's little lineup. Right, okay, so first off we'll be looking at the new release of the organic. This was bottled at 43%, distilled in 2008, bottled obviously this year, making it a 9-year-old. As far as I'm aware, it's still exactly the same. It's made from organic barley, aged in organic oak as well, as far as I'm aware. So that'll be the first one. Then we will look at the standard 10-year-old, which is bottled at 43%. Then we will move on to the 10-year-old 100%, or 100 proof I should say, which works out at 57 ABV percent. We will then quite a jump up in age statements. We will next be looking at the 30-year-old, again bottled at 43%, which I've tasted in the past, and well, it's on the shelves, so I think that'll tell you all you need to know about that one. Then we will be looking at the 1976 vintage, which I believe was bottled in 2012, thus making it a 36-year-old, bottled at 46% rather than 43%. And finally, we'll be looking at the Peat Smoke 2005, again bottled this year, making it about 7-8 years old, and again bottled at 46%. So I think this is going to be a really interesting tasting. Hopefully we'll tasting the young organic, which I think is all aged in American oak, certainly from tasting it anyway. That's what I'm led to believe. Then we'll be looking obviously at the 10-year-old, which is a combination of American oak and sherry cask, and moving up through the older age statements to finish with the peaty one. So yeah, I think this is going to be quite interesting. So without more ado, let's start with the organic. Right, okay, so the interesting thing about the organic when it was first released was that obviously the casks were brand new. They were brand new oak, and it had a very, very oaky character, which I personally didn't mind. I think it was quite enjoyable. Subsequent bottlings of the organic, the oak content was toned down, which I can only assume is because obviously some of these casks were beginning to be reused, and thus obviously lessening the oak impact. So I think the last bottling that I tasted, was had very not very little, but a smaller amount of oak character. So let's see what the nose gives us on the new bottling then, shall we? Again, the oak is not really that heavy. The emphasis is more on the sort of the crisp, very barley-led citrus, little bit of honey, but wonderfully fresh nose. Really, really classic, robust spey-like character. Well, spey-like character, Speyside whiskey. So there's a little bit of toffee, a little bit of vanilla, sort of in the background. It's got I mean, I would guess they're probably bringing in now some more newer casks. I would guess. So there's a little bit more oak character than I remember it from the last time. But it's just wonderfully fresh. Really, really interesting. I mean, it's not mega complex, but you know, I think, like I said, it's got a lovely barley led character, real freshness. Mm. Palate. Mm. 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 Oh, finish is lovely. Really chewy and malty. And, lots of barley. Got quite a herbal character in actual fact. It's got a sort of almost kind of young rye-like herbal character. Soft spice, apricot, some nice fruit. Quite citrusy and minerally. Um, Intense, but really nicely balanced. Again, there's not a huge amount of oak. The oak is definitely there. You can taste um, the soft vanillins, but it's certainly sort of playing second fiddle to the spirit character. So a lovely whiskey, I think, and a really good starter. So yeah, nice one. Okay, so let's move on to the 10-year-old. Now, as I was saying, the 10-year-old is created from a combination of spirit that's been aged in both American oak and sherry casks, also lightly peated as well. So I've always really liked the 10-year-old because I've always thought it's always been really nicely balanced. It has the elements of each of the cask types. You get the spirit, you get the peat as well. And so, you know, there's one or two bottlings I've tasted that have not been quite so brilliant, but by and large, I think this has been pretty much a consistent bottling. So let's see what this one gives us then, shall we? Quite a lot more peat than I remember, to be honest with you. Dusty, slightly violety, quite earthy, the peat, obviously. Um, Beneath that, I can get obviously the American oak, the sort of soft vanilla, the citrus, apricot, barley, and just a smidge of dried fruit from the sherry cask. The sherry cask is really quite sort of sat in the background. So they've obviously used, you know, a fairly small amount of sherry cask matured spirit in this particular bottling of the 10-year-old. But again, I think the balance is really nice. Getting a little bit of tea leaf now, cigar leaf, tea leaf, that kind of thing. It has a nice complexity, and like I said, I think this is really nicely balanced and not too expensive either, I hasten to add. Palate. Dry peat smoke, coal dust. More sherry cask on the palate, more of the dried fruit, but it's not too overt. There's still some citrus character, some fleshy barley, juicy fruit. But peat is really lingering. It's really dry. It's really dusty. Wow, that's really nice. I guess you could argue that there might be a little bit too much peat there, which I suppose is not the overriding characteristic. It's certainly a dominant characteristic, but I think underneath it, you're still getting the character of the wood, the character of the spirit. So yeah, I still think that's a very, very good bottle. Right, so moving swiftly onwards to the 100 proof. Let's see what the nose gives us on that. Now, I mean, you can see from the colour there's a lot more Oloroso sherry here. It's leafier, it's herbal, there's dried grape. Not so much peat in actual fact, just a little bit, just a smidge in the background, which is more as I remember the 10-year-old from tasting it previously. Raisins, a little bit of prune, but still there's some nice citrus, there's some little bit of American oak, vanilla, but it certainly seems to me that the sherry cask is more to the fore in the 100 proof bottling. Palate. And that is backed up by the palate. A lot more of the leafy Oloroso character, dried fruits, prune, raisins, sultana. The combination of citrusness and alcohol really makes the finish quite, not tart, but very dry. There's a little bit of peat smoke, a little bit of certainly on, which seems to come through more on the aftertaste, with that little bit of dustiness. But it's fairly full. It's robust, and again, I think it's got plenty of character. Let's put a little drop of Speyside water with it and see if that changes the character in any shape or form. That should do. Oilier now. It's a little bit, not muted is the wrong word. It's kind of like a lot of cask strength sherry matured whiskies. The sherry does tend to sort of drop off a bit once you put a little bit of water with it, and this is certainly the case. I'm getting more of the American oak character now, more of that sort of barley, fresh, herbal. Again, that sort of almost rye-like herbal note that we found in the organic. I mean, it's, yeah, I think it seems to be handling water pretty well, and I think certainly adding a little drop of water has certainly tamed the sherry cask element quite considerably. So it's a lot better balanced with a drop of water. Palate. Getting more of the peat now, in actual fact, more of that sort of dusty peat on the finish. Again, it's still fairly heavily accented towards the sherry, but it's softened. It's more rounder. There is an element of the spirit character coming through, but again, it does seem to be primarily on the palate, pretty much about the sherry cask. I will say that there's no blemishes to it whatsoever. It's wonderfully, spotlessly clean. A lovely minerally finish to it. Really, sort of, you can just feel it. Yeah, that's good. Right, moving on to the 30-year-old. Yes, I know it's a bit of a big step up in age statement, but anyway, let's see what the nose gives us. Now that is nice. That's a gorgeous nose. Again, I would guess there's a fair degree of sherry here, but it's got that wonderful dusty, mature oak character. Again, touch of tea leaf, cigar leaf, still some really quite fleshy barley, apricot. All it's starting to move into that kind of tropical or slightly tropical kind of fruit character, which a lot of mature Speyside whiskies do tend to sort of display. But that honey, lovely, light, luscious honey. Oh, that is worth it. I mean, that's three figures, obviously, as you probably well know. But oh, that is a gorgeous nose. Again, just a very, very light peat note, and I mean, it's only very, very light. It's kind of wrapped up in that kind of tea leaf, cigar leaf kind of note. Oh, wonderfully deep. Just one of those noses that you just sort of like just want to keep sticking your nose in the glass and just go, and you just pick up new nuances every time. There's a little bit of satsuma now, touch of lemon, plenty of barley. Like I said, nice and robust. And that delicate sort of peat smoke just floating above the top. You know, this is absolutely gorgeous. But oh, that's heavenly. Glides. Soft, smooth. Again, a lot of the distillery character, the barley, the crisp citrus, a little bit of violets, a little bit of peat smoke again, and some lovely, lovely mature oak. Not getting quite so much sherry now. There does seem to be some sherry there, obviously, but it seems to be on the palate more about the American oak, sort of dusty vanilla character that old American oak tends to show. Wonderfully long, wonderfully honeyed, a little bit of spice as well, a little bit of dark chocolate. That is a sensational malt. That is really very, very good. Like that. Okay, and moving on to the 1976, 36 years old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Even deeper, oilier, probably more American oak here, although I think there is a little bit of sherry hiding somewhere. Dusty, deep, a little bit oilier than the 30-year-old. I'm not really getting any real peat. There's a little earthy note, a little bit of spice. I think there is still a little bit of sherry there, but it's predominantly American oak. Really dusty, really mature, but it still has this vibrant element, and that's the thing that I think seems to make Benromach stand out. That its spirit has this wonderful vibrancy to it, and that carries through into quite some significant age. I mean, I would imagine that this spirit could quite happily sort of mature on for another 4 or 5 years, so you quite comfortably get 40 or maybe even 50-year-old Benromach in due course, I would imagine. But oh, that is gorgeous. Dusty, getting really sort of not sweet, but sort of creamy oak now coming through. And again, it's got that sort of herbal element to it, that almost rye-like kind of element. Really, really complex spirit this. I'm probably not, doing it amazing justice, but yeah, it's one of these sort of whiskies you can't put your nose in a glass. You've got to experience this, because this is absolutely stunning. But oh, wow, what a spicy finish. I mean, yes, I'm guessing that sort of bottling at 46% is giving that greater input from the alcohol, which really does kind of add piquancy to the finish, and those spices are just going whoa. You know, it's like wow, that is impressive. Again, I'm getting more sherry character, but it's not the overwhelming characteristic of it. So yeah, you're getting the sort of the dried fruits, the sherry spices, um, but it's still got some lovely barley, some soft, dusty American oak. Um, Not quite as tropical as say the 30-year-old, but what a spicy finish I'm getting. Toffee, um, dark chocolate, and real sort of not bitter, yeah, it's sort of combination of bitter and sweet spices, which are kind of really balancing out quite nicely. Quite woody, as you would obviously expect, um, but oh wow, what a finish! Wow. Right, and finally we're on to the peat smoke. Now I did look at my notes, but I certainly hadn't made a note of it of what the peating level is. But I think from memory it's quite high. It's something like 60 odd parts per million, 62, 65, which is a lot of peat, really. I mean, and I remember when the first when I mean I've tasted, this is batch 5, and I've tasted all 5 batches now as they've been released over the years. And batch 1 was fairly lightly peated, and it was a classic lightly peated Speyside whiskey. You've got the peat, but you've also got the character of the spirit. You've got the fruitiness. You've got all the Speyside character. Batch 2 and 3 just started to seem to deviate from that as the peating level went up. It seemed to be more coastally in character. That was more, at the time I remember thinking it's just like Colila. I mean, yeah, all right, it was a lovely spirit, but it just seemed to be going away from the whole kind of ethos of what this was supposed to be, i.e. a peated spey, not an Isla kind of copy, if you see what I mean. And batch 4 sort of came back more towards the whole concept of the peated spey, rather than, like I said, being a sort of an Isla kind of copy. And my first thoughts on seeing the sort of peating level of this was, well, it's going to probably kind of be all peat and no trousers, really. But anyway, let's see what the nose gives us. There is a lot of peat there, it has to be said. It's very sweet peat though, very herbally, very heathery. Again, it's very, very dominant, and it does seem to be kind of overriding the character of the spirit. Although the character of the spirit is there, it's kind of chunky, it's dense, it's a dense spey. There's no you kind of there's no real coastalness to it. So you know you sort of like stick your nose in and you think, well, yeah, it's heavily peated, but it doesn't kind of give me that Isla kind of coastalness. But I still think that the peating level is too high for it. I think it's way too high for what it's supposed to be. But underneath you can sort of smell the esters of the spirit, the sort of slightly banana-y, sweet apricot, sweet banana-y. But then in saying that, I've tasted Lefroigs that have been very, very similar, that have that kind of very sweet kind of character. And I mean, it's a lovely nose. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I certainly think it's a wonderful whiskey, but I do question whether the distillery is sort of like, you know, getting away a little bit from the whole kind of concept of the peated spey and moving into this let's do something mega peated kind of thing. Maybe it's kind of not, you know, sort of like chasing Parker points per se, but that's a wine reference for those of you that don't know. But it's kind of almost kind of doing an Octomore chasing, if you see what I mean, with Octomore sort of raising the bar with regards to what's possible peating level wise in malt whisky. So, but it's got still got a lovely freshness to it. You know, there's some nice barley notes, almost quite gristy, but it's very heavily peated. But like I said, the peat is very sweet. A little bit of manure now, a little bit of coffee, sort of coffee grainy kind of manure-y sort of. I mean, I like it. I mean, it's nice, but again, I keep coming back to, is it getting away from the whole kind of concept? But anyway, palate. Of course, that's dry. Not salty, but dry. Almost salty. Probably the alcohol, probably the tannins, a lot of peat again. But again, like I was on the nose, very very sweet peat, earthy, dusty, sweet. Yeah, there is still some crisp Speyside character underneath that, but again, the emphasis is all about that peat, that sort of. I mean, it's a lovely whiskey. Don't get me wrong. I mean, absolutely stunning. A little one-dimensional, maybe, I suppose. But then it is fairly young. But I think if you're just judging it on what's in the glass, then I think you'd have to concur that it's a very good spirit. If you're looking at it in the overall wider ethos of things, then I think it's sort of moving too much in the peated direction. But anyway, that's kind of summing up before we get there. So anyway, let's sum things up. Right. Okay. So Benromach. I've always been a big fan of Benromach. I like what they're doing. You very rarely do you get a bad bottling from them, although I did taste a 1 litre bottling of the 10-year-old that was in duty free, or travel retail, sorry, as they should say, which was, shall we say, less than perfect. But aside from that, I think what they're producing is very, very good spirit. I love the packaging. I love, it's all very, well, it is modern. It's kind of, sort of moving with the times to a certain extent. But anyway, coming back to the spirit, the organic, yeah, I like the organic. I mean, whether it's always this thing about whether sort of organically grown barley actually makes any difference to the character of the malt. I mean, certainly the major difference, as far as I can tell, is that obviously organic barley is lower yielding. It's the grains are smaller. There's less starch that gets turned into to alcohol. So, but whether it actually has any real difference to the spirit is difficult to say, unless I suppose you're tasting them sort of side by side, and you've got an 8-year-old, from normal barley and an 8-year-old from organic barley. It's always very difficult to say. But as a standalone bottling, I think it's really nice, really crisp and fresh, which is what you want from your Speyside. The 10-year-old, you kind of expect, I guess, a sort of like a cask strength version to be basically a cask strength version of your 43% bottling, but certainly not in this case. It's got a definite point of difference, where the 10-year-old is a lot more subtler on the sherry characteristics. The 100% proof with cask strength bottling, if you for want of another word, it's obviously more of the sherry cask influence, so definitely a point of difference in regards to that. Moving on to the older age statements, the 30-year-old, absolutely gorgeous, really mature, lovely whiskey, it has to be said. Just again, like I was saying while we were tasting it, Benromach just seems to sort of keep that element of freshness, which kind of sometimes really old whiskies kind of lose, which is, I guess, obvious. You stick something in a cask for 30 odd years, you're going to lose that element of freshness. But that certainly seemed to retain it, and I thought was exceptionally good. 36-year-old kind of just took things to another step upwards as far as I'm concerned. Really complex, really impressive, and again, brilliant use of both American oak and sherry cask. And finally, the peat smoke. Well, I think I pretty much said all about the peat smoke when I was tasting it. But again, as a sort of a standalone whiskey, I think it's a very, very nice whiskey. And it's a point of difference. I mean, this is the whole thing. You know, lots of people that love the peated malts have done the Islers and probably done them to death, to be honest with you. And, you know, it's something different. It's, you know, it's not an Isla. It's, you know, the classics bay, really. I mean, you know, we've spoken about this well and truly in the past that, you know, back in sort of Victorian period, you know, Speyside distilleries used a lot of peat, so it is a throwback kind of style. But it has a kind of a modern feel to it. It has some fruitiness. It certainly doesn't have that kind of coastal character that you associate with Islers, which again makes it a point of difference. So. So there you have it. I think it was a really, really interesting tasting, and I'd just like to say a really big thank you to the Benromach distillery for all of today's samples. It's you know, really generous to, you know, give me all these kind of samples, and I hope I've done your whiskey proud. So all that's left to say is, you know, check out Benromach. You know, pop into the shop or order one online or whatever. But, you know, if you've never tasted Benromach, I think you could do a lot worse than sort of pick up a bottle of the 10-year-old. So, anyway, good running and good afternoon.
Összeláncolva két kezed, békjóban s ezt te élvezed. Őrangyalod rég elveszett, hát démonok majd éleszek. Összeláncolva két kezed, békjóban s ezt te élvezed.